Choyo sampo pagyo trashi pa tuche tempe trinle yarngoda pege drolor zampe tsepar palden lame shabla solvade Om Guru Vajradhara Suma Timu Nishasan Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Hum Om Guru Vajrad Suma Timu Nishasane Kar Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Hum Om Guru Vajrad Timu Nishasane Kar Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Pakyuke Kudan Dagi Alu Pakyuke Sungdan Dagi Nga Pakyuke Tugdan Dagi Yi Tün Yerme Çiktu Çingi Alu Makyuke Kudan Dagi Alu Makyuke Sungdan Dagi Nga Makyuke Tugdan Dagi Yi Tün Yerme Çiktu Çingi Alu Om Mahamuni Shakyamunye Swaha Om Muni Mahamuni Shakyamunye Swaha Om Muni Mahamuni Shakyamunye Swaha Sangye Chedan Tsoge Chonam Lai Chanchu Pardo Dani Kyapsu Chi Dagi Chishe Gibe Sonam Ki Drola Pinchira Sangye Druparishu Sangye Chedan Tsoge Chonam Lai Chanchu Pardo Dani Kyapsu Chi Dagi Jinso Gibe Sonam Ki Drola Pinchira Sangye Druparishu Sangye Chedan Tsoge Chonam La Chanchu Pardo Dani Kyapsu Chi Dagi Jinso Gibe Sonam Ki Sangye Druparishu
In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, I take refuge until enlightenment. With the practice of generosity and the other perfections, may I obtain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings.
Buongiorno. Partiamo da una base che ci abbiamo tutti in comune. Ci sono alcune cose sulle quali noi non possiamo tanto mettere in discussione, come il fatto che tutti siamo nati e tutti moriremo. Quindi c'è la nascita, c'è la morte e c'è quello che c'è in mezzo. Poi quello che c'è stato prima o meno della nascita possiamo discutere tanto. Quello che ci sarà dopo la morte anche possiamo discutere tanto. Però fatto sta che ci troviamo in quello che c'è in mezzo, fra questi due. E fatto sta che all'interno di quello che c'è in mezzo fra la nascita e la morte, che noi chiamiamo di vita, esiste una fortissima attrazione da parte di ognuno di noi a star bene e una forte avversione a star male. Quindi noi in ogni modo possibile cerchiamo di fare il possibile, di trattenere le cose, le situazioni, eccetera, che noi riteniamo che ci aiutano a star bene e cerchiamo di evitare in ogni modo possibile ciò che secondo noi ci fa star male. In altre parole, esiste una forte attrazione alla felicità e una forte avversione alla sofferenza. Che in altre parole si dice tutti vogliono essere felici, nessuno vuole soffrire. Ci siamo, no? Perciò la domanda fondamentale che viene fuori è: che cosa è la felicità? Che cosa è la sofferenza? O meglio, dove proiettiamo la felicità e dove proiettiamo la sofferenza? Perché se andiamo ad osservare ad un livello un po' più oggettivo, la sofferenza riguarda le situazioni specifiche o è una sensazione interna? Secondo voi? È una sensazione. La gioia, la felicità è una sensazione o sono situazioni, oggetti, eccetera? È una sensazione. Quindi in realtà non c'è tanto su discutere che cosa è felicità e che cosa è sofferenza. Quello che c'è su cui noi abbiamo punti di vista diversi è dove noi proiettiamo la nostra felicità e dove noi proiettiamo la nostra sofferenza.
The real question is, where do we project our happiness and where do we project our suffering? What do I need to do to be happy? And how do I imagine within this context of happiness? What do I need to do to avoid suffering? And what I imagine in this context of suffering. I'm convinced that all living beings, not only human beings, they all try to avoid suffering and obtain happiness. And maybe the word happiness, maybe we can use different terms, to be well, let's say. And among human beings, it's about where we project our happiness. And from forever, within our own abilities, we've done everything. We've done our best to try to reach this happiness, to avoid suffering, and to reach a state of happiness, of well-being. And we've developed many, many systems for this. So to understand a little bit better, let's start from another fact. The suffering is of two types. Even pleasure, there's physical and mental. Even the feeling of wellness or happiness, it comes through a physical sensation, but then there's also this feeling of well-being that comes through a mental process. So this, in reality, is because all feelings, all sensations are of two types, physical and mental. And every sensation has one, the pleasurable and one of suffering. If we want to philosophize a little bit more, there are 6 types of the feelings that are multiplied by 3, the sensations that come through our 6 senses, our hearing, our sight, our taste, etc. And then the mind. And then for each one of those those 6, there's a pleasurable one, the one of suffering, and one that's neutral. So that makes 18. So let's remember to not complicate things too much. Let's remember that there are physical and mental states of suffering and happiness of these 3 types. When physical suffering is strongly present, does our mental suffering increase, decrease? Does it remain the same? In my opinion, when we have a lot of physical suffering, it doesn't mean that there isn't a malaise in the mind, because suffering is experienced in the mind. I mean, suffering is a state of suffering that is experienced in the consciousness of our mind. But when we have this physical suffering, is our only priority that this suffering end? So when there's a physical suffering, when there's a physical suffering, mental suffering diminishes in that specific moment. But the point that I want to get to, I don't want to go on too long about it, is that we, in the development of our human reality, we've tried in every way to avoid physical suffering and tried to reach well-being. So we try to avoid hunger, we try to avoid cold, we try to avoid heat, we try to avoid pain. And I have to say that we have become really agile in all of this. Among all of us who are here today, how often in your life has it happened that you were suffered because you were too thirsty, too hungry, too cold, too hot, or in too much pain? Very, very little, because when there's cold, we have warm clothes and we have heating, and when it's hot, we can go somewhere in the shade, or we even have air conditioning. And where there's hunger, there's always food, and the same thing for thirst. For pain, we have painkillers to take away such pain. So somehow we've been able well enough to protect ourselves from physical suffering. On the other hand, even for physical pleasure, we live in a state of comfort that's not indifferent. The physical comfort in which we live today is better than kings of the past. Most of us live in a state of luxury that is much higher than many kings of the past. But what happens that even if we have reached these 2 aspects, where we're never lacking anything that we need, we never go hungry, etc., etc., but we eat what we like. We have situations full of pleasure, physical pleasure, etc. Still there's suffering. Still there's dissatisfaction. And if we were to ask ourselves among us, if we were to ask ourselves, is there more mental or more physical suffering in our lives? In your opinion, it's mental, right? It's one of a master of my master, Kyabche Tsong Rinpoche, in a teaching that I heard recorded. He was very direct, and he said, the suffering is of 2 types, physical and mental. The poor people suffer mostly from physical suffering, and the rich suffer mostly from mental suffering. At the end of the day, they suffer the same. It depends, from case to case, but generally speaking, what we see clearly is resolving physical suffering is not enough. living in a state of comfort and physical pleasure is not enough. And at this point, we try somehow to reach a state of well-being. And if I were to put into very simple words what Buddhism is, I would say it's the putting together of three things: a worldview, a paradigm, a way of seeing reality, rules of conduct, what should be cultivated, what should be abandoned, how do we interact with the world, and then third, techniques of personal transformation, meditation, recitation, prayers, art, etc. They support the view and go hand in hand with the conduct. All of this to reach a state of well-being and avoid suffering. So it starts from this need that we have. So let's go right to the point, because today I wanted to give more space, more emphasis with what comes after. And normally what happens is we enter into so many details on the basis, and we don't have time for the rest. So today I'd like to go right to the point, to understand Buddhism's worldview, and as a consequence, Buddhism. Because one might ask, was Buddha Buddhist? What does it mean to be a Buddhist? But for me, the point is, it doesn't really matter to me to be Buddhist, to identify myself and label myself Buddhist. What is important for me is that Buddha transmitted a worldview, rules of conduct, and tools of transformation that for me are valid. And this is what's important for me, and this is what I want to talk about. So let's start with the worldview. Some important questions regarding one's worldview that we all have, and this has to do with all traditions, and whether we're aware of this or not. This has to do with what we think reality is, who am I, has to do with what I think happiness is, what I think suffering is, why we suffer, what are the causes of happiness, the causes of suffering. Is it possible or not to actually live in a state of real peace and balance? Is it possible then to eliminate suffering? And in front of this, first of all, we can see two views. Before we get to Buddhism, these two views are divided like this. I personally call it a materialistic view, or materialistic utopia, where we believe that it's possible to reach a state of well-being, peace, joy, a state free of suffering, which is the same. They're the two sides of a coin. So this first view says it's possible to reach this state through mostly external conditions, something material, something external from us. So the day that I will be rich and powerful, and when I will have pleasures, when people around me will be like this or that, I will be happy. I will be fine. And very often we live within this paradigm, right? It's important to remember that a paradigm is not conceptual. It's something much deeper, something through which we see our reality. So the basis paradigm in which most of us live is where we believe that we will be happy when. We will be happy when we will be able to have what we want, when we can avoid what we don't want, and we can never be separated from what we like. imagine for just a moment, what would it be like? Would you be happy? Really? I mean, if you could have everything you want, avoid everything you don't like, and keep what you love, I'd be happy. So, on the other side, we think that we suffer, and here I repeat, it's not a philosophical, analytical belief that comes from reflections. I'm talking about our very practical daily beliefs. Every time that we suffer, do we point our finger at something or someone? We do, don't we? Because when we have a sensation, be it pleasurable or not, one of the first things we do is we ask ourselves why. I remember once I felt this great joy, and I wasn't able to find the reason. I was in the airport going from the south of India to Nepal, and I was in the airport of Calcutta, and it was incredibly hot, and I needed to go from the domestic terminal to international flights, and I had to go outside in the parking lot. I had a huge trolley, tons of luggage falling over because there were lots of holes in the road. I was by myself. I didn't have much time before my flight. I was just a boy. It was about 45 degrees. And as I was in that situation with that blocked trolley in the middle of all this, I just felt this tremendous joy. And I remember asking myself why. And really, I looked for a reason. I couldn't find a reason. I mean, I wasn't going to Kathmandu for some special reason. And I couldn't find a reason. It was an important moment for me because sometimes the problem isn't the answer, but it's the actual question. And that showed me this. The point is that when we have a feeling, we have a sensation, we ask ourselves why. And when I ask myself, why am I suffering? Why am I happy? Normally, do we point our finger outside or inside? Usually outside. And in doing that, when we talk about our own suffering, normally we think that we suffer mostly because of three things. We think we suffer, one, because we can't have what we want. In other words, I think that I'm suffering because things are not the way I think they should be, because the person is acting the way I think he shouldn't act, because I don't have what I would like to have, so I can't have what I would like to have. That's the first reason why we think we suffer. The second reason why we think we suffer is I suffer because I need to live situations that I don't like. You talk to me in a way I don't like. There's a situation that I don't like, etc., etc. I'll give you a very simple example to give you the difference between the two. I go to a restaurant. I ask for something, I order something, but something arrives, a different dish arrives. I had one expectation and something different arrived. I think this has happened to everybody, right? So I'm upset. I'm upset because what arrived is not what should have arrived, even if it's good. And or maybe in the second case, it's what I ordered, but I don't like it. So we think that we're suffering because reality isn't the way it should be, because I can't have what I wanted in that first case. And in the second case, that reality that I'm living is I don't like it. There's something that's not right. In the third case, we think that we suffer because we need to be separated from what we like, places, situations, objects, people. And we are actually quite simple. So I don't know if you're able to find a moment of suffering that goes beyond these three possibilities. Normally, these are the reasons why we suffer. And as a consequence, we think that to be happy, I need to get what I want, avoid what I don't want, and keep what I like. And Buddha tells us it would be wonderful if that worked. But let's try to analyze with a little more clarity. Let's try to observe, to analyze with a little objectivity. I mean, first of all, is it possible to get everything that we want? No, because the nature of desire is the more that I want, and the more I want, the more I have, the more I want. It's not possible to have everything we want. Number two, is it possible to avoid everything we don't like? Have you ever lived a moment in your life where there was no difficulty, where everything went smoothly according to what you thought, how everything was going the way it was supposed to be going? For you or for others? For me, I've always had a very beautiful life. But even within that, there are difficulties, things that we don't like. So that's an illusion too. And the third point, is it possible to not be separated from the things that we like? Or is it the nature that everything that begins sooner or later finishes? And as soon as it starts, it goes towards finishing. I heard something recently. As soon as one is born, one is old enough already to die. It's true. So what happens is we live within this illusion. If it worked, then that would be great. But the truth is it doesn't work. And Buddha's vision tells us, look, suffering, and as a consequence also happiness, because we're talking about the same thing, two sides of the same coin. It's not true that we suffer because we can't have what we it's not true that we suffer because it's not true that I suffer because I can't have what I want. It's not true that I suffer because I'm a victim of the world and the world isn't the way it should be, in my opinion. But I suffer because I project onto the world something that cannot be sustained. And with this, I'm not saying that the world around us is marvelous and beautiful in every aspect, and I'm just not able to see that beauty. I'm not saying that. I'm convinced that each one of us in our lives, on a personal level and on the level of society, there are difficult situations. There are situations that are not pleasurable, that we live. It's not, because you don't know how to see, you don't know how to see the beauty when someone speaks to you violently. No, but what happens is, from this first point, I don't suffer because I can't have what I want. I suffer because I don't have the causes and conditions to have what I want. It's like buying a house. And I love morning sun. For example, personally, I like to sleep where at night it's pitch black, but have the morning rays of dawn. This is something that I like very much. For luckily, I live somewhere where where I sleep is towards the east. So at night, it's there are woods, and it's a big window, and it's very dark, but the morning sun comes in through the trees. But let's say that I had this pleasure, but that I lived in a house where my window was towards the west. At this point, I would say, oh, I have a problem. The sun should rise from the west. And I'm upset because because I wake up in the morning and the sun is coming from the east and not from the west. And I say, you see, I can't wake up with the morning sun because the sun is coming up on the wrong side. What would you say to me if I was suffering from this? Maybe you would tell me to buy another house, or to open up a window on the other side of your house. That you would tell me that it's a useless suffering. Because the point is, this fact is that the sun doesn't rise in the west. So I suffer for something that is useless. There's no solution. It's like saying, I would love to be pregnant. No matter how much I desire being pregnant, or how much envy I have for women, pregnant women, and no matter how much I suffer for this, what's the only solution for me to become pregnant? To die, to be reborn as a woman, and then we'll see. I don't see another possibility here, right? So if now in this body I'm suffering for this, what would you say? You would say it's useless. So I'm not suffering because I want what is not possible to have, because the causes and conditions don't allow for it. If the planet at a certain point stopped and started turning the other way, then the sun would come up on the other side. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. So I don't suffer because I can't have what I want. I suffer because I want what I cannot have. Now think, for each one of you, think of something in your lives that in your opinion should be different, could have been different. Have you ever suffered for something because you wanted it to be different, because the person doesn't act the way he should, or a situation? This happens, doesn't it? But if we observe that situation objectively and we ask ourselves, how is it that that situation is like that? Is it because there's an infinite number of causes and conditions that bring it to be like that? It's like an equation where every part brings a result. But in front of all of those parts, that result can be none other than that. So the way someone else acts, or a situation that we live, I mean, does it come from nothing, or is it a whole coming from many, many aspects of words and decisions that over time brought it to be that? So I desire something for which the causes and conditions don't exist. So we suffer not because we can't have what we want, but because we want what is not possible to have. So what's the fundamental difference between these two things? In the first one, I'm the victim of the world, and in the second one, I'm not the victim of the world. I'm responsible for what I live. If I'm the victim of the world, the solution is found in the world. If I'm not the victim of the world, but I'm responsible for what I live, the solution can be found within myself. And this is a fundamental difference. And this is one of the first points. It's not true because I suffer because I have to live situations that I don't like. I suffer because I don't know how to face difficult situations in a positive way. Is that difference clear? Another way, I'm not the victim of the world, but I'm responsible for how I live that situation. So it depends on me. It's not true that I suffer because I need to be separated from what I like, but I suffer because I'm not able to accept and live harmoniously and at peace with the most simple, to say, the nature of everything, which is it's in constant transformation. I suffer because I see that which is impermanent as permanent. If I accepted impermanence, when I see something finish, I would accept that, and I wouldn't live with this feeling of sadness, non-acceptance. So how important is for us? How important is the reality that we live? How important is it for us? In other words, the way other people, our environmental situation, our material situation, economic, work situation, familiar situations in society, how other people talk to us. I mean, does this all have an influence over us or not? Yes, absolutely yes. At the same time, how important is how I live all of that personally. It's fundamental. And here I remember the Greek philosopher who says we need to distinguish between what depends on us and what doesn't depend on us. He says that suffering comes from trying to having control over that which doesn't depend on us, instead of trying to control what we have control over. So what depends on us? Our choices, our actions, our thoughts. What doesn't depend on us, the world around us, what other people do, what happens around us. And he adds also the body, but so even if we are strongly influenced by the world in which we live, wherever there's interaction, there's transformation. And if I interact with a situation, as a consequence, I transform myself. If I'm in front of someone who's aggressive and I interact with that aggression, don't I? And that has an effect on me. It transforms me. But, and this is the fundamental point, when I interact with that situation, between me and the situation, there's something in the middle, which is the filter of me, the way that I interact with that situation. Because let's remember, none of us is able to live anything independently from the filters of ourselves. And when we're faced with any situation, the way we interact, the filters through which we perceive those things, that changes completely our own experience. I remember just a few days ago, there was a long period actually where Lama Michel Rinpoche he spent a lot of time in his room, where he received people, he did a lot of things, but from, let's say, dawn to dusk, he would have the news channels on, the TV. And every once in a while, that would bother me a little bit. Maybe I was there to talk to him, something important, and behind me there was CNN or BBC or Euro News that just repeated the same thing over and over again. And at a certain point, I said, Rinpoche, why the news? Shall we turn it off? He said, you can turn off if you want. I said, why? And he said, you know, I don't even understand what they're saying. I'm not watching. But when you put the news on, there's so much suffering. And I see these images of suffering, and I use those images to pray for people. I connect to these people, and I connect to these people and their suffering with my prayers and my thoughts. And so this way, I'm remembering others and I'm not trapped. It's a way also to show that we shouldn't stay trapped in the I and the my. Instead, I think for most of us, when we see such news, it brings us a state of indifference, because at a certain point we feel useless, powerless, and we have this mechanism of self-protection, so we become indifferent to that suffering. We see things on TV that are so bad, and we stay almost neutral. Sometimes yes, sometimes less. And when we're not indifferent, we generate a strong feeling of powerlessness or aversion. But the point that I want to get to is that when we're in front of something, we're not able to live that independently from ourselves. And according to the filters that we use, our reality changes. So I don't want to say at any moment that in the context in which we find ourselves doesn't have an influence, doesn't influence us. But in other words, the actions of other people, our environment, does it depend on us or does it not depend on us directly? It doesn't depend on us directly. Independently, we influence the situation, but directly, no. What depends on me directly? How I live it. And the way I live it changes my reality. Beyond this, it happens that if I have dirty filters, if I put glasses, like in my case, that very often are dirty, if my glasses are dirty, how do I see the world? Dirty. If I put on rose-colored lenses, I'm going to see the world pink. If I put on yellow lenses, I'll see things yellow, because we see things through our filters. If I put on filters of resentment, abandonment, anger, etc., I'm going to see the world through that. In this present moment, are we able to experience something in this present moment independently from our past experiences? Is someone able to live this present experience independently from his past? No, it's not possible. So one filter through which we live our present is our past. That's why childhood is so important. They say that that first phase of childhood, from 0 to 6 months, and then up to 3 years, and then up to about 7 years, they say that these are the most important phases for the formation, the shaping of our world, because in in those phases, we are knowing things for the first time. Afterwards, we know how things are. Something appears to us, and we do some kind of inner research from our past experience, and we say, this is this, that is that. And very often, we live this present totally conditioned from our past experiences. So, it's true that we are conditioned, that we're influenced. Our physical state of being is important, our environment is important, but our mind, our inner way, the filters that we apply through which we see the world, this is more important than anything else. In other words, a healthy environment and a healthy body with a sick mind means living in heaven but being in hell, as if one were in hell. The opposite, which is difficult but possible, which would be an unhealthy environment, an unhealthy body but a healthy mind, is like living in paradise while being in hell. The ideal thing would be to live in paradise while your mind is in paradise, to be in paradise while you're in paradise. But the point is that the context in which we find ourselves is not the point. It's how we live that. Then the main causes of our suffering are our selfishness, our obsession with self-gratification, our inability to see others beyond our own selves, to live every situation always in relation to the I and the my. And sometimes people say, I'm not selfish. My children are more important to me than myself. I say, yeah, your children. Let's remember that my is an extension of the I. Obviously, it's better. There's worse. You know, maybe some people don't even care about their own children. I mean, this is also possible. So better to cherish your children more than yourself. But we're always putting ourselves at the center of everything. And one of the causes of suffering is explained as if we lived as if we are the most important thing that has ever existed, that exists and will ever exist. It's a little bit of a caricature of how we see things, but it shows the ideal. We live everything in relation to the I and the my. This means to be obsessed with self-gratification or selfishness. And from this arises attraction to what is good for me, and that which turns into desire, and then aversion to what I deem as harmful to me, that gives rise to anger and then there are all the variants, arrogance and jealousy, etc. Here's a question for you that comes together with this, that for me is very important. Let's think about physical suffering, pain. What's the function of pain? Or here, better yet, does it have a function? What would happen if we never had any pain, if pain didn't exist? We'd already all be dead. Why would I need to eat? If eating wasn't pleasurable and hunger unpleasant, we'd be dead a long time past. So what's the function of pain? It's kind of a red flag. It's an alarm that sounds saying, okay, there's something that's not right. If you put your hand on the flame, it hurts. You shouldn't do that. So our system, our being, has marvelous characteristics. It's the system itself is always trying to bring us to a state of balance. And when with that very little that we can choose, because of all the functions in our body, how many of them depend on choices that we can make with awareness, and how many are just autonomous? How many of you need to worry about, worry if your kidneys are working or what your liver's doing, or say we need to tell our immune system, now do this and don't do that. I mean, so much is happening within our bodies every second that we don't even need to think about with awareness anyway. But there's a very, very small part that is not autonomous in choice, the choice of what to eat, how to interact, how to rest or not, etc., etc. With that small amount of choice, we can pull down the whole system. So when we have pain, it's our system telling us that there's something that you're doing that is out of place. It's a symptom. But what we do is when we have this symptom, when the alarm sounds, do we try to understand why the alarm is going off, or do we want to just turn it off? Our tendency is just to turn off the alarm. When we get a headache, do we ask ourselves why we have a headache? Think that maybe it's my cervical spine or my liver, or do we just take a pill to stop our headache? So pain has a function to tell us that there's something is not right. It needs to be eliminated, but it needs to be listened to. Mental suffering. Is it the same? In my opinion, yes. When there's mental suffering, it shows that there's something that we're doing and our interactions is out of place, in the sense that it's not harmonious. There's a way that we interact with the world that's not working. And there are certain feelings that we have that actually, at the end of the day, they bring us to this state of suffering. Somebody would say, well, they're normal, natural, but okay, but it doesn't mean that they're good for us, and it's possible to diminish them. Anger, hatred, resentment, sadness, fear, dissatisfaction, arrogance are among these feelings. So the view that Buddha brought is the reason why we suffer is not because of the conditions in which we find ourselves, but the way we actually live those conditions. In other words, suffering doesn't come from what happens in the world, but from how we live the world. If we look at the world even on a wider scale, the conflicts that are happening, there are many today, not only the terrible ones that are under the gaze of everyone, but so from these crazy enormous wars that are happening now to the small arguments in our daily lives, tell me one conflict that was caused from an external material reason, objective reason, and not from inner defilements. So if we want to eliminate wars, should we make walls and barriers and destroy each other, or change ourselves? I'm convinced that if we really cared about world peace, one of the most important things, one of the greatest enemy for world peace is the lack of altruism, our inability to see others, our selfishness. These are the same causes of the environmental problems that we're living today. They arise from objective reasons or inner attitudes of dissatisfaction, selfishness of human beings, etc. Also, on a very practical level, the cause of suffering is not the world in which we live, but the way we live this reality. So, getting back to ourselves, Buddha said, Danyi, danyi, dagi, I am my own protector, I am my own enemy. Which doesn't mean getting into a feeling guilty. It means being responsible for oneself. It means remembering that the objective is not about doing or being. The key is, who do I want to become? Who do I want to be? I remember as a child, for example, and they would come to me and they would say, what do you want to be when you grow up? I don't know if you've ever been asked this. Maybe when you get to high school and you need to choose between you need to choose which direction, what you want to study. I didn't have this problem because I was already in the monastery. But the question that is asked most frequently is, what do you want to do? Right? Or when we talk about someone, if you want to understand something about that person, what does that person do? Oh, he's a doctor. He works in the bank. He does this, that, and the other. Or am I wrong? It's like this, isn't it? But I think that what's much more important than what we do, is who we are and who we become in our life. The question isn't what do I do, but how do I do what I do? Who am I? Am I a patient person, a joyous person, stable, loving, compassionate, satisfied, harmonious? Or am I dissatisfied, angry, anxious, full of fear, resentment, hatred, etc.? Am I that kind of person? These are the two extremes, but because at the end of the day, what really makes the difference is not what I do, but how I live it, how I do it. Who am I as a person? So the objective that we should set, and Buddha brings this, what is brought in Buddhism has to do with not with what I do, but who I am inside. And as a consequence, that defines how I live the world. It doesn't, to make ends meet, maybe I do a repetitive job, like working a toll booth on the highway, or maybe I do a very complex job as a high manager or a lawyer or a great scientist. But what's fundamental, independently of what I do, who am I? How do I live this world? Because what determines my experience is not what I do, but how I do it, how I live it. In other words, who am I? Who am I becoming in my lifetime. As I go on, as the years go by, as the experiences accumulate, am I becoming a better person or am I worse off today than in the past? For example, for myself, I've set the objective, the my minimal, my basic objective is I want to die a person, a better person than the one that was born, which is not that obvious. But the question is, how is it that I'm transforming myself? And here comes another point of view within the Buddhist view, which is all of us, all living beings, sentient beings, we have the potential to reach the so-called nirvana, which means a state of profound state of peace free from suffering. To tell you the truth, there was a long period in my life that lasted about 1.5 years where I was strongly doubting. And I was saying to myself, I dedicate my life to Buddhist studies, but I don't deeply believe it. I believe in the concept, but I don't believe that I can do it. When I look around myself, I say, oh, maybe in the past, certainly someone has reached this state. I trust what they're telling me. But in this present moment, when I look around, we are really not in a good situation. And when I look at myself, I say, well. So I stayed with this doubt for about 1.5 years and talking with some masters. I had the opportunity to talk to His Holiness the Dalai Lama, with Lama Michel Rinpoche, with Geshe Tubten Rinchen, my main teacher of philosophy, and putting together what they shared with me. The result is, first of all, it's something that comes through a gradual process. For example, is it possible to diminish one's anger or not? In my opinion, yes. Is it tiresome? Yes. Does it require effort? Yes. But is it possible as one gets older that one can have more patience and less anger? It's possible. And what's that limit? Is there a limit? One says beyond this threshold, you cannot eliminate any more anger? No, the limit is when there is no situation that brings me that feeling, brings me to feel that anger or hatred. There were even masters in the past, disciples of Atisha and his disciples in the Kadampa tradition. This is before Gelupa, before Lama Tsongkhapa, and some of these masters, these practitioners, it's said that when they were in situations where nothing that they lived took away their stability, they couldn't lose their patience with anything. It's said that they would actually go and look for extreme situations to see if there wasn't some kind of hidden anger somewhere, something that could take away their stability. And they could train there. I don't think we have this problem. But what happens is it possible to diminish our anger more and more? Yes. And on the other hand, what's the limit of love? Can we love one person? Really see the other person and desire that person's happiness as if it were as important as our own happiness? Can we live someone else's happiness as important as our own? It's possible. So it is possible to love someone. How many beings can we love? 3, 5, 10? Is there a limit? What imposes a limit to love? What limits our love? This obsession with self-gratification. as long as I set the limit that I love those who are nice to me, who are good to me, who's good to the I and the my. That's the limit that I have. But luckily, it's possible to transcend that limit. So at the end of the day, it's possible to eliminate gradually those dynamics, those inner dynamics that bring suffering, and to develop more and more the inner attitudes, inner states of being that bring well-being and happiness. That's possible, isn't it? Yes. And this takes us to the point, the result, that it is possible to reach this state of inner peace, nirvana. And this is one of the fundamental points of Buddhism. The importance of dreaming, of believing in something greater than our mere daily survival in a state of pleasure. Because often we have this tendency to survive comfortably. Life goes by and we spend our life trying to avoid suffering and problems. We try to resolve problems and to get pleasures, and life goes on. One of my masters once said to me, if you live your life trying to avoid suffering and getting pleasures, there's not much difference between you and a cow. I said, explain that to me. We were in India, in the south of India. I don't know how many of you have seen images or been to South India. There are cows everywhere in the roads, and they just roam freely. And he showed me outside the window. He said, "You see that cow, right? When the sun is beating down and the cow is grazing, and where it's very hot, but then there's also maybe a point of shade. Where do the cows go? They go to the shade. When they graze, and there's a part where the grass is dry, and where there's a part where the grass is fresh. Where do they go? They go to the fresh grass. So we're the same." So why am I am alive? What meaning do I give to my life? Where do I put my energy? Because when we wake up, every time we wake up, from waking up to waking up, we're using up energy from our food, from the sun, and we're transforming that energy into action, physical action, actions of body, speech, and mind. So in which direction am I putting my energy? There's an inevitable level that has to do with our livelihood, our survival. We need to eat. We need to have a house, a place to live, and so we need to work and have this material exchange. That's how it works in our society. That's inevitable. That's fine. We need to survive. That's part of our reality. But beyond that, what do I want? Where do I put my energy? In my life, I needed to face one aspect among my various defects. One was my laziness, and I really had to face it. They say that to really face an enemy, you need to know it. So I really looked into my own laziness to understand my own laziness. And at the end of the day, in Tibetan Buddhism, they define 4 types of laziness. The first one is the shameless laziness, where one says, "I just don't feel like it." Then there's another kind of laziness where we postpone. Yes, of course, I need to do that, but I'll do it later. So we procrastinate. And then there's a laziness that's a little bit more elaborated. We say, no, this is really important and I will do it. And it's not that I don't want to do it now, but I just can't do it now because I need to do something else. So where we do something useless, that keeps us from doing something useful. And the fourth one is even more subtle. We said, oh, it would be wonderful if I could do this thing, but I'm just not able. I know that it would be wonderful if I could meditate or if I could have love for everyone for many, many hours, but I'm just not able. I agree that I see that I am not able to meditate for 3 hours straight, but let's start with 3 seconds, 3 minutes. So various types of laziness. What is laziness? It's the union of two inner factors. This is my own definition, so it could be right or wrong. So it's the union of two factors. The certainty of the importance of something united with the lack of desire for that same thing. I know that something is good. I know that something should be done, but at the same time, I just don't feel like it. And who speaks louder? Knowledge or sensation? Desire. Who has a louder voice? Desire. And when they said the antidote to laziness is effort, I said, well, thank you. Tell a lazy person to put effort. It just doesn't work. I don't know if it works for you. For me, no. Until one day I was following teachings, the teachings of the 51 mental factors, and at a certain point, these teachings, at a certain point, they say the effort comes from aspiration. Aspiration comes from faith. In other words, effort, putting energy into something that is positive but not easy, comes from desiring it, from wanting something, and that desire comes from believing in that thing. And this brought me to a fundamental point, which is what do I want? Because one of the most important strengths in our lives is our desire, forces, and that it's that force that pushes us towards anything. So here's the question. The question, what do I want, is not a simple question. It's not something to which we find an answer so easily. Do I want simply to survive comfortably? Do I want to live my life where every day is a cause, is part of a positive transformation? How do I live my life? What do I want, really? And here comes the importance of utopia, the importance of dreaming, of desiring something that transcends the I and the my in this present moment, my pleasure, my pain in this immediate moment, desiring something greater. And in Buddhism, we call nirvana. I want to reach a state of peace. And I want more. I want every being reach that state of peace. I want every being to live in a state free of suffering, live in a state of joy. And to do this, I have an objective that comes first, where I see that the only way that I can help others is the only way I can help others is to reach that state of peace myself, because I can't help you do something. I can't teach you something that I don't know how to do something myself. I can't help you be more patient when I get angry, constantly. I don't know if someone who doesn't practice something has ever tried to give you advice on that subject. It just doesn't work. But instead, when someone lives something and then gives advice, it has a much greater strength. So in Buddhism, we say if you want to help someone transform himself in a certain way, you need to be that transformation. You can't bring someone to peace if you do not experience peace yourself. So, as Mahatma Gandhi said, he says, be the change that you want to see in the world. Believe in something greater. Well, someone might say this is utopic. And I go back to a time when I heard a poet, an Argentinian poet. He said once, actually, to be very precise, it was a poet that was talking about a friend of his who was a poet, and he said that once he saw this poet friend who was Argentinian friend, he saw them at a conference at a university, and someone during the conference at the university asked him, "What's the function of utopia?" And he answers, utopia is like the horizon. The more you walk towards the horizon, the more the horizon goes farther away. And so the function of utopia is to get us to walk, and I'm in a certain precise direction. So we've gotten to the point in this period where we think, if I can never get to that point, why should I put energy into walking? Better if I just stay here comfortably. We live in a time where we want to have a most comfortable life possible. It's we live on pizza and Netflix, and not pane and circo, like the Romans used to say. And we do what we need to do for our survival, and the rest of our life we spend it trying to entertain and to numb our minds so we don't think about all the rest. Sorry if I put it in these terms, but we don't allow ourselves to dream. I think, well, if I can't reach all of it, then why should I even walk in that direction? Because when I have an objective that is like that horizon, and I walk in that direction, I will get to places that otherwise I never will reach. And what worries me is seeing how most of us either we've lost or we just don't believe. Maybe we never had. We don't believe in the utopia of peace. We don't believe in the utopia of peace because we don't build peace daily, starting with ourselves. Lama Michel Rinpoche would constantly remind us that inner peace is the most solid foundation for world peace. In a family made of 5 people, if those 5 people are in conflict with themselves, is it possible for there to be a family at peace? If in that family each one is at peace with himself, can there be a peaceful family? Yes. Doesn't mean that there aren't difficulties to face, but the harmony can be found in resolving any kind of problem. So believing in something greater is fundamental. And at the beginning, I started something that then I didn't finish. So I'll go back to that. When I said that there are two ways in this worldview. There's a materialistic worldview where we said that we believe that we can be happy through outer conditions. And that second one is where we believe that we can be happy through inner conditions. And in that first one, there's another crossroad that says it's possible to be happy. It's possible to reach that happiness with external conditions in this life, or maybe in your next life. Do what you need to do, and then next life it'll be perfect. Maybe they say, okay, you'll never find it in this life, but if you're good, when you die, you will go in a perfect context. You will have perfect conditions. This concept of heaven, I mean, what's the description of heaven if we look? It's a place where you can have everything you want, where you're free from what you don't want, and where the beautiful things that you have, they exist forever. But in my opinion, that's an illusion. What would happen if we told all Italians, what happens if all Italian people were reborn in heaven? We meet all in heaven. Do we bring our problems with us? What would happen to that heaven? It's no longer a heaven. This planet in which we live, if we just looked at nature, if it weren't because of the selfishness of humans, it would be heaven. And Pure Land in the Buddhist tradition makes reference to a place where the majority of the people who live there are people who are at peace with themselves, who have a more evolved state of love and wisdom, harmony, peace, etc. That's the concept of a Pure Land within the Buddhist tradition. So that first crossroad says that it's not about changing the world, but changing the way we interact with the world, and that starts by changing ourselves. And this is a fundamental point of Buddhism. And within that, we create objectives that we call inner peace, nirvana, happiness, call it what you want. Sustainable happiness, if we want to use modern terminology. But the point is, I don't put energy in what I don't want. So we need to ask ourselves, first of all, what is it that I want? And if what I want is really this inner peace, at this point, what do I need to do? And here, there are three fundamental steps. If we were to take all Buddhist teachings, they could be summarized in these 3 points, the 3 principal aspects of the path. If someone said, what is the Buddhist path? What is it made of, this Buddhist path? Many, many aspects, but we can summarize them in these 3 main points, which are loving oneself, loving others, and living reality according to a coherent understanding of reality. The first point, loving oneself. A starting point for loving oneself is stopping to victimize oneself. And sometimes I ask forgiveness for saying it like this, but I think one of the first steps to begin a spiritual path is stopping to victimize ourselves, because as long as I point the finger and blame others or other things, then I'm not doing for myself. And this doesn't have to do. This doesn't refer only to Buddhism. There's many spiritual traditions talk about this. There's one philosopher called Martin Buber. He wrote a book called the Path of Man, and there was a beautiful book, and there was a passage where he talks about this. It was very, very beautiful, where he says everything starts by looking at oneself. And if you're in a certain situation, we want to make a change by changing ourselves, but even changing also others with whom we're in conflict, we've lost that possibility that we have, because when I set that condition that also the other needs to change, then I've lost the opportunity to make the change myself. So as long as I victimize myself and I said, this because this one did this and that one said that, that takes away from ourselves a real possibility to do something. How others behave towards us has an impact on us. Yes, I don't take that away from you, but do we have the ability to change others or not? Have you ever tried? I've tried and never been able to. I've never managed. So how others behave, do we have the solution on changing others? No. Of course, our interaction with others has an influence, but it is not determining. So I cannot change others. So using a term that might be a little strong, how others behave, even if it influences me, it's not my problem. It's not my problem because I don't have the solution. Remember, that which doesn't have a solution is not a problem, it's a fact. In Portuguese, we say that which doesn't have a solution is already resolved. So what happens is, how others behave is not my own problem. Not because it doesn't influence me, but because I can't resolve it. How I live that situation, how I interact with that behavior. Is that a problem? Is that my problem? Yes, because there's a solution. Let's remember the epithet of the philosopher, that depends on me. When we stop victimizing ourselves, we can focus on what depends on ourselves. So as long as there's a small part that says, yes, I need to change how I do things, but the other should do this, that, or the other. I don't know where I heard this, but this phrase that I heard, I liked it. It says, anything that comes before but has no, anything that, actually it was in English, it said anything that comes before but is bullshit. So it has no value, anything that comes before but. And when we say, yes, I should be more patient, I should be more stable, I should react differently, I should here and there, but you should all do this, that, and the other. I've lost that possibility that I had. So a fundamental passage or step in loving ourselves, which is not easy. I mean, it's really not easy to do it to do it sincerely. And we should be done on you should do this in specific situations. Stop victimizing yourself, which doesn't mean that other people's behavior doesn't influence us, but remember that other people's behavior doesn't depend on us, but how we interact with that situation, that behavior, how we live it, that depends on us. I know that it's not easy to accept this. I know that saying it is one thing and actually doing it is another. And that's why I'm repeating it for the umpteenth time. I'm convinced that in our lives and in some situations in our lives that we victimize ourselves and we stay trapped and we wait for someone to be different or something to change that will allow us to be different. If we have a little bit of that, maybe we say, yeah, well, I do this, but. So it's important as a first step to not victimize ourselves, to see that I do what depends on me. And in that which depends on me, in this process of loving oneself, there are two challenges that, in my opinion, are difficult but important, two challenges that are not nothing. When we're able to go beyond and overcome these two challenges, then we're loving ourselves. The first one is abandoning. Being able to abandon situations, actions, choices, that which we like, but that is harmful to us. The second challenge is cultivating that which we don't like, but that is beneficial to us. On one side, I stop victimizing myself, and on the second one, I go beyond the I like, I don't like, but I give more importance to what is good for me and what is bad for me, regardless of whether I like it or it's pleasurable or not. Have you ever been attracted to something that is not good for you? What about eating? Is there something that you like eating that's bad for you? For me, yes. When I'd go to the doctor and the doctor would say, you can't eat this, that, and the other, I would say exactly the things that I like. And one day talking to a doctor friend of mine, he said to me, when a patient comes to me, I ask, what is the thing that you like to eat most? And he used the example of watermelon. If a patient says watermelon, I tell that patient the first thing is stop eating watermelon. And then I go to see how what watermelon has to do with that imbalance in that person. But when a system it is actually imbalanced, one is attracted to what increases that imbalance. So why do we like that which is bad for us? Because we're not balanced, we're sick. When we are attracted to what is good for us, it shows that we're in a state of balance. So that first step is stopping to victimize ourselves, and then I go beyond. I go beyond the I like and I don't like, and I go to see what's good for me, what's bad for me. And there are 4 types of objects and situations. 2 are a challenge, and 2 are challenging, and 2 are not. The things that are good for us that we like, we don't need to worry so much about. And the things that we don't like that are bad for us, we don't need to worry about those either. We naturally are attracted or have aversion. So ideally, we have pleasure, we have attraction for what is good for us. But in this process, There are many, many aspects. Our lifestyle, what we eat, how we rest, how we talk to others, and how we think. What are the attitudes that are good for me? What are the attitudes that are bad for me? And here, morality, here we can talk about morality, which is not ethics on what is good and what is bad. Morality is our own ability to maintain our commitments, our ability to do what is good for us and avoid what is bad for us. So in this first step of loving ourselves, I invite you to write a list today based on what I know, what is good for me and what is bad for me. And then every day, little by little, step by step, I avoid what's bad for me and I increase things that are good for me. And we need to respect the length of our own legs, taking one step at a time. But this attitude of avoiding what is bad for us and cultivating what is good for us is the basis for loving oneself. Then we can get into details, the concept of the law of karma, as karma literally means action. And it's a concept that shows that every action is an interaction that brings a result. And in front of this, there's the meaning of responsibility, and that every action I do is never in vain. Every action I do will interact and will bring a result. And so I need to act in the most coherent way possible. And here we could spend years talking about this first part. This is one of the first one of the first characteristics of this first point of Buddhist traditions, which is, just to summarize, we talk about having clarity of what we want. Where do I project my happiness? I project my happiness onto something that is sustainable and not illusory. And then I set an objective and I do everything that sustains and helps me go towards that objective. I take away what goes against that objective. That second fundamental point. It's not possible to love others without first loving oneself. And loving oneself is not enough. We need also to love others. So that first step of loving oneself, the second step is loving others. And it's allowing ourselves gradually to go beyond this obsession with self-gratification. It's about opening up our hearts towards others, where we allow ourselves to see others, to see the happiness and the suffering of others as important as our own. And here there's a point that for me is very important. That second step, that second fundamental aspect, the technical term is called bodhicitta, which is the mind of enlightenment, the state of altruism. Altruism does not exist in opposition to selfishness. In other words, it's not by eliminating selfishness that we develop altruism. What is selfishness? It's this obsession with self-gratification that's based on this strong attraction and desire of happiness and aversion to suffering. I want to be happy. I don't want to suffer. Altruism is the same thing, that doesn't exclude oneself but includes others. The altruistic attitude, I want to be happy. Yes. Do I want to suffer? No. But the person in front of me, this being in front of me, his or her happiness is as important to me as my own. His or her suffering is as important to me as my own, where I'm able to expand this feeling, where I'm able to include others without excluding myself. Because otherwise we get into this dynamic where I need to be a loving person, altruistic person, and so when I do something for myself, I feel guilty. When I do something for others, it's a sacrifice. And it's not like this that it should be. When I do something for myself, I'm doing it also for others, because if I'm not well, then I don't have the possibility of helping others. And when I do something for others, I'm doing it also for myself, because others' well-being is as important to me as my own. But this is a gradual process. It's not something that comes from one day to the next. It's part of the path. Along the Buddhist path, we develop more and more love and compassion and altruism. We include others and we give importance. We give the same importance to all. We expand this circle of attraction for their happiness and aversion to their suffering. That's love and compassion. What's important in the development of love is when we try to open ourselves up to others. A first thing is, it's not possible to love others without first seeing them. Because very often we try to love others, but actually we're not loving others. We love, quote unquote, that function that that person has for us, like saying I love chocolate. When we say I love chocolate, we want chocolate to be happy, to be well, or we're saying I'm happy when I have chocolate. I feel good when I have chocolate. So when I say I love someone, the way I love chocolate, I don't love that person. I'm attracted to that person. I desire that person. I project my happiness on being with that person and receiving affection, attention, etc. from that person. This is not love. This is desire. When instead I say, I love you, understood as being, I want you to be happiness, your happiness is important to me, that doesn't take away the desire I have for you and my happiness that I feel when I'm with you. But desire and love are two different things. Is that clear? It's clear that we have a problem of semantics. I know that in the Greek language there were many different terms, love between friends, love between lovers, etc. Instead, today we use only one, love, but the love, one meaning comes from Sanskrit. Kama means passion. Maybe you've heard Kama Sutra. Kama is desire, is passion. So if love comes from kama, passion, love in English comes lubya, which is Sanskrit, also means passionate desire. So when we say I love you, I have passion for you, like for chocolate. In Sanskrit, there's another word, which is maitri. Maitri is a feeling. We use the word love, but we use the same word for two different feelings, very different feelings. Maitri means your happiness is important to me. I am attracted to your happiness. Karuna is I have aversion for your suffering. Compassion. And these are two fundamental qualities for us. Seeing others, which means I allow myself to see you beyond what you are for me. I try to see you without having to to um, to compare you to what you do for the I and the my, because the selfish way of loving is you function based on doing good to the I and the my, but once you no longer once you hurt me, how can I love you? There I have that filter of selfishness. We see others in function of ourselves, of the I and the my, whether they treat us well or badly. So an important step here is seeing others, being able to see others, transcending that filter of the I and the my. I see others no longer in function of myself, but I see others in function of themselves. This allows me to love them independently of the interaction with the I and the my. This is a long process. There are many, many teachings, meditations, and paths that take towards this this opening up our heart really to others. And I assure you that it's beautiful to be loved, but loving is much, much more beautiful. It's one of the most beautiful feelings that we have. And once we have this possibility of loving someone, that someone is already giving us so much. His or her presence, existence, allows us to come into contact with the most beautiful part of ourselves. So when I love you, really, I don't need anything in exchange, because you're already giving me the possibility of coming into contact with the most beautiful part of myself. Okay, but this is a path. This is the second pillar, the second fundamental point. The third one that I'll just talk about in 3 minutes, even if it's the most complex of all of them, living reality in a coherent way. Let's just give 2 quick examples. Everything that we see, perceive, experience, the reality in which we live, is it in constant transformation or is it static? It's in transformation, isn't it? So it's impermanent, which doesn't mean that it exists and then it no longer exists. It means that it's just in constant transformation. So when I see you today, and I am going to see you again tomorrow, am I going to meet the exact identical person or a changed person? Have I changed from one day to the next? So when we meet someone and we say, I'll see you in a week, and we go to meet that person, who do we think we're going to see? The same person or a different person? We don't even have the awareness if it's the same continuum, but that might be different. No, we expect to see the same person. So in just a few words, even if we can spend hours talking about this, the reality around us is impermanent, but appears to us as being impermanent, or does it appear to us as being permanent? I imagine that this evening you imagine that you think that you're going to go back to the bed that you woke up in, more or less like this, no? You're going to find the same bed, the same bedroom, right? But it won't be the same bedroom, actually. it will have changed because it's changing constantly. But this impermanent reality appears to us as being permanent, and we relate to this impermanent reality as if it were permanent. This is a form of ignorance. Ignorance means to not seeing. I don't see the impermanence of what is impermanent. This is a form of ignorance, and worse yet, I relate with what is impermanent as if it were permanent. This is called the permanence of grasping at the permanence of that which is not permanent. Can you see this incoherence? The incoherence of the way that we relate with the world that we around us. I mean, we could spend hours talking about the more details, but now is not the time. What would be wisdom in this case? Living this impermanent reality as impermanent, which doesn't mean that is there and then won't be there. It just means that everything is in constant transformation. Nothing comes from nothing. Another example. Can you see me? Yes or no? If you ask the person next to you, do you see Lama? Or someone asks you, can you see Lama? What would your answer be? Yes. And the next question, which Lama do you see? The same one I see? I mean, without philosophizing, what would we say? Yes. But how many Lamas are here? There's one Lama. What a stupid question. There's only one. But if we were to analyze, when we see each other, are we seeing the person or do we see our own version of that person? What I see and what you see, is it the same thing or is it similar? In Tibetan we say, Jana Moaying. That which is similar is by definition different. So what I see is not what you see. Not because I'm special, but because we're all different. In other words, the reality in which we live, is it an objective or a subjective reality? Is someone able to perceive something independently of himself? No, so it's subjective, because everything I see is a reflection of myself. It appears as being subjective, or does it appear to me as being objective? When I see something, do I think that I'm seeing a situation that corresponds to my filters and my projections? Oh, look at how I'm looking. Look how I live this experience. Or do I see what's there? The reality appears to me as being objective. At the same time, everything that exists in an autonomous, independent way, or does it exist in an interdependent way? It doesn't exist independently from the interactions that it has. Is there something that can exist independently from its interactions? No. But reality appears to us as if it existed autonomously, independently, and objectively. And we relate to everything, and ourselves included, as if everything existed in an autonomous, objective, and independent way. Things that it's not like that, and so that's incoherent. So if we lived our subjective reality subjectively, or lived the interdependent reality as being interdependent, this would be the correct way to live things, see things. So the correct way of reality is to understand first conceptually and then non-conceptually that we live in an impermanent reality, an interdependent reality, and subjective. And if we can apply this in our lives. So just to recap, the essence of the Buddhist path is the worldview where the objective is to reach a state of peace that doesn't depend on external conditions, but on how we live these conditions, where we are influenced by external conditions, but they don't determine our inner reality, because it's our inner reality that then actually creates our outer world. As we said before, conflicts influence us, but conflicts are created by inner realities of each people that are manifested in words and in action. So the solution is not outside, but is within. How can I reach this state? By loving myself, by loving others, and by living life in a coherent way. Loving oneself, the term is translated as renunciation. I don't really like this translation, because when we say renunciation, we feel that it's connected to a kind of sacrifice. The word in Tibetan is nejung, nejung, ne barjungwa, which is the certainty, the certainty to reach this state of peace, to get out of this state of suffering. It's loving oneself, desiring clearly this, wanting clearly this state of peace, and living accordingly. And then bodhicitta, this feeling of love towards others, where we expand our feelings, where we're able to go beyond our selfishness, and at the same time have coherence in our perceptions, in our interactions with the nature as it is. We live the impermanence as impermanence, and subjective reality as being subjective. And the last thing, how can we do all of this? We say that between saying and doing, between saying and doing, there's an ocean between. And between understanding and actually doing, there's an ocean between. So we do this by listening. We listen, we read, we come into contact with some kind of knowledge. After, we need to make this knowledge our own. So we need to understand. So it's no longer a repetition of what we've heard, what we've said today. It's not something that Lama said or Buddhism says. No, I believe, because in my own logic, in my own experience, in my own understanding, it's clear. So if Lama were to come and say it's no longer like this, I wouldn't believe it unless he proved differently. It's fundamental, like saying a fire burns. I don't touch the fire because they told me that it burns. One thing is being told that it burns. Another thing is putting one hand on the fire. Once I have the certainty of something, not because they told me, but because I've understood it, I've experienced it, I believe it deeply, it's not enough, because we're made of habits. Understanding that I shouldn't get angry helps, but doesn't resolve. I need to familiarize myself. Today we talk about the plasticity of the brain. This fact that our mind, our body, our being, it can be shaped according to the experiences that we have. And here's a fundamental point. We don't have the choice of transforming or not transforming. We don't have the choice of shaping ourselves or not shaping ourselves. We're constantly transforming. We're constantly changing. We're constantly familiarizing ourselves with one thing or another. The main question is, if I want to, do I want to change myself as an without awareness, as a reaction to what happens around me, or in this process of transformation, do I want to be in charge, that go towards that objective of what I want to become? And repetition is essential. The more I complain, the more I will complain. The more I think, the more I will think. The more easily will I think. I mean, here it's a national sport to criticize, looking for defects in things. I mean, we should see we should see where there are shadows, but we need to put energy into bringing the light. So to take away the darkness, I need to bring light. Sometimes we think that taking away the darkness, we can take away darkness by pointing our finger at the darkness. But once I've understood, we need to familiarize ourselves. We need to induce ourselves to act with our body, with our speech, with our mind, even if it's not spontaneous. Acting in an artificial way doesn't mean false. False means I do something that I don't feel. I do something fake. I want to show the world something that I'm not. Artificial means that it's sincere, but it's not spontaneous. Maybe it's not 100% pure, but there's a percentage of true in there that allows me to act in that way. And the more I act in a certain way, even if it's not spontaneous, more natural and spontaneous that way of being will become. And we're like a muscle. The more we act in a certain way, the easier it becomes. And on a physical point of view, the more we use a part of our brain, the more developed that part of the brain becomes, and the easier it becomes to do that thing that we want it to do. So it's part of our path to live in our daily life with the greatest amount of coherence to what we want to become, so that gradually we become that. We live according to what we want to become. So here, to conclude, we have two choices. We can live this present as a result of the past. We react to what has come, or we live the present as a cause of the future that we want, or we react with awareness of what we want to become and not as a reaction of what was. And this makes an enormous difference. And we ask ourselves where we want to go, who we want to become, what kind of family we want to have, what kind of relationships do we want to have with those close to us. And according to that, we act in this present moment. So I accept this present moment, and without opposing the present, I direct myself to the future that I want with a lot of patience and a lot of affection towards ourselves. And let's remember that results come with constancy. And here, the meditation as a tool to help us to create to create this familiarity. So meditation becomes an important tool for this. So this is just a few words. Buddhism has different approaches because we are different people, and since the time of Buddha, Buddha taught differently according to those he was teaching. And having different mentalities, we need different approaches to get to the same point. So when people ask me, I want to follow Buddhism, what should I do? It's difficult to answer that question. You need to get close, create friendship with this reality, start knowing it. And it's not a linear path. It's a path that looks more like a puzzle. When we have a puzzle, how do you put a puzzle together? Do we take one piece of the pieces and we look for the second piece? Or we start dividing by color, or we try to make the border, and then by blocks, and then little by little we put areas together, and then finally, we can put in that last piece that everything becomes clearer. And following the Buddhist path is similar. We work on areas, and then little by little, it's like a sphere, a circular puzzle. Everything is connected and coherent in its whole. I don't want to live in a Buddhist world. I don't think that we all need to be Buddhist, but I want to live in a world where there is more love, where there's more respect and satisfaction and coherence, more peace. This, yes. And I have no doubts that Buddhism is an extremely worthy tool to reach that goal. So it's now time for our dedications. I thank you deeply for being here. And I ask you the simple request that if you think that you've heard something that can be beneficial in your life, please try to put it into practice.
Dralme cheki pela longche chi sada lamge yente rabzone dorje change kopa nyurtoba sho shide simcho rimpoche make panaman ke gyurchi kepa nyambra mepa yang kongne konto pelwar shon possa la preziosa mente pacifica che non è ancora nata sorgere e crescere.
May the precious
non degenerare e crescere sempre di più.
May the precious Bodhi mind that has not yet been born grow. May that which has been born continue to grow and never decline. At dawn or at dusk, at night or midday, may the three jewels grant us their blessings. May they help us to achieve all realizations and sprinkle the path of our lives with various signs of auspiciousness. Thank you, everyone. Tashidele, have a good lunch. And just something practical this afternoon, there will not be another session because this afternoon I need to translate for Trisha Rinpoche, a master in America. He asked me to translate teachings that he's giving now in the United States, and so I need to be connected with him for that time.